Have you ever said no to something you didn't want to do, and then spent the next 3 hours feeling like you had done something wrong? Not because anyone criticized you, not because there were consequences. Just a quiet guilt that settled in the moment you chose yourself. If that feeling is familiar, the issue may not be selfishness at all. In fact, it may point to something much rarer hidden beneath your personality. Most people who feel guilty after saying no assume it means something is wrong with them. That they're weak, too soft, too much of a people pleaser. That they should have grown out of this by now. Psychology says something completely different. This guilt isn't a personality flaw. It isn't weakness. It's a signal from a nervous system that learned, very early, that saying no had consequences. That protecting your own needs came with a cost most people never had to pay. Your guilt cue isn't a flaw. It's a survival skill that outgrew its purpose. This video is meant to educate and validate, not diagnose. If anything here feels personally relevant, speaking with a mental health professional is always the right next step. You say yes when you mean no. You apologize for having limits. You feel selfish for having needs. You've spent years putting everyone else first, and you've quietly wondered why you're so exhausted. You give and give and give. And the rare times you don't, the guilt arrives so quickly, it almost feels like proof that you've done something wrong. You've been doing this for so long, it feels like personality. It isn't. It's a pattern, and patterns can be understood. The guilt didn't start in adulthood. It started in childhood, in environments where saying no wasn't safe, where a child's boundaries were not respected, not acknowledged, or not permitted, where expressing a need that conflicted with what the adults around them wanted resulted in punishment, withdrawal of love, or the specific kind of silence that taught the child their needs were inconvenient. Emotional neglect doesn't always look like abuse. Sometimes it looks much quieter. Sometimes it looks like a child who learned that the fastest way to maintain love was to never say no, to never push back, to never become the inconvenient one. That lesson absorbed early, repeated consistently, built the guilt that still follows you today. It was never weakness. It was conditioning. We're going to go through 5 psychological traits that people who feel guilty after saying no almost always carry. Where each one came from, why each one isn't a flaw, and practical steps to begin setting boundaries without the guilt that has followed you your entire life. Stay with me. Trait 1. Hyper-awareness of other people's feelings. The first trait is the most foundational. People who feel guilty after saying no are almost always people who are extraordinarily attuned to how other people feel. You don't just notice disappointment, you absorb it. You can sense the other person's reaction before they've fully had it. This isn't ordinary empathy. This is hyper-awareness, a social perception that runs at a depth most people never access. And it didn't develop randomly. This level of attunement typically forms in childhood environments where reading other people's emotional states was necessary for safety, where the child needed to anticipate moods, sense disappointment before it arrived, preemptively manage the emotional responses of the adults around them. Your nervous system became extraordinarily sensitive to the emotional weather of the people around you, not because you chose to, because you needed to. And now, as an adult, when you say no and the other person's reaction registers in your own body, before they've even responded out loud, you experience it as guilt. But it isn't guilt. It's information. Information your nervous system has been processing your entire life. The cost is real. You cannot say no without feeling the other person's reaction inside yourself. But here is what most people miss. This awareness isn't weakness. It's a rare perceptive intelligence that most people will never develop in their lifetime. You're not too sensitive. You see things other people don't see. Trait 2. You were trained that your needs come last. The second trait goes deeper, into a belief so embedded it doesn't feel like a belief at all. It feels like truth. The belief is that my needs come after everyone else's. You may not say it consciously. You may not even recognize it as a thought. But it runs underneath everything, shaping every decision, every interaction, every moment when your needs and someone else's are in conflict. And it almost always wins. Their needs, their comfort, their preferences. Yours come last. This belief wasn't chosen, it was trained. In childhood, you were praised for being easy, rewarded for not complaining, loved most when you were most accommodating. You were the child who never made things harder, who never asked for too much, who learned through years of subtle, consistent messaging that the safest version of yourself was the most agreeable one. That training is still running. Every time you say yes when you mean no, every time you put someone else first without even noticing you've done it, every time the option to prioritize your own needs doesn't seem to occur to you until you're already exhausted. The cost is enormous. Decades of putting everyone else first and quietly depleting in ways nobody around you can see. But this isn't selflessness. It's a survival adaptation that was intelligent in childhood and is now costing you in adulthood. Selflessness is a choice. What you have is conditioning, and conditioning can be unlearned. Trait 3. You equate saying no with hurting people. For most people, saying no is simply a boundary, a neutral piece of information, something that creates mild disappointment at worst. For people with this pattern, saying no feels identical to causing harm. The word itself, no, carries an emotional weight that most people don't experience. It feels like rejection, like cruelty, like you've deliberately hurt the person you said it to. That equation, no equals hurt, wasn't accidental. It was built in childhood. In environments where saying no to a parent resulted in emotional consequences, where the child's refusal was treated as betrayal, where boundaries were interpreted as rejection rather than what they actually are, limits. So the child absorbed a lesson that has followed them ever since. Saying no causes pain. Therefore, if I am a good person, I do not say no. That equation is still running every time you try to set a boundary. The guilt isn't proof that you've done something wrong. It's proof that the old equation is still active. The cost is the inability to distinguish between a boundary and an act of cruelty. But here is the reframe. The fact that you care this deeply about how your words land on other people is not a flaw. It is an extraordinary level of relational sensitivity. People who don't care simply say no without thinking about it. You're not them. And the fact that you're not, once the conditioning is unlearned, will become one of your greatest strengths. If you've recognized yourself in any of these 3 traits, you're exactly who UNFELT was built for. Subscribe. Hit the bell icon. There's more here that was made for you, for the people who have carried these patterns quietly for years without anyone naming them accurately. The next 2 traits go even deeper. Stay with me. Trait 4. You carry responsibility for things that aren't yours. People who feel guilty after saying no almost always carry an inflated sense of responsibility, not just for their own actions, for other people's feelings, other people's reactions, other people's emotional experiences. When you say no and someone is disappointed, you don't just register their disappointment. You feel responsible for it, not partially, entirely. As if their emotional response is something you caused, something you must now repair, something that belongs to you to fix. This sense of responsibility often comes from childhood parentification, the child who became responsible for the emotional climate of the home, who learned that other people's feelings were their job to manage, who absorbed responsibility that was never theirs to carry and has never quite put it down. So now as an adult, you carry a weight that doesn't belong to you. The weight of other people's disappointment, the weight of their reactions, the weight of their emotional experiences. You feel personally responsible for outcomes you didn't create and shouldn't be carrying alone. The cost is exhaustion that no amount of rest can touch. Because you're not just carrying your own life, you're carrying the emotional weight of everyone around you. The reframe is this. This sense of responsibility reflects an extraordinary capacity for care. That capacity is real. That capacity is rare. But it needs boundaries around what actually belongs to you. You are responsible for your words, for your choices, for your actions. You are not responsible for how other people choose to feel about them. Those are different things. And learning to hold that distinction slowly, gently, is some of the most important work you will ever do. Trait 5. You measure your worth by how much you give. This is the deepest trait, the one underneath all the others. And it's the one that changes everything when you finally see it clearly. People who feel guilty after saying no often carry a foundational belief about their own value. That they are worth what they give, that their presence in someone's life is justified by what they provide, that their place at the table in the family, in the friendship, in the relationship is earned through service. And the moment they stop giving, stop accommodating, stop saying yes, stop being the one who makes things easier for everyone else, their value disappears. That belief was built in childhood emotional neglect. In environments where the child's worth felt conditional on their usefulness, where being loved and being helpful were the same thing, where the child learned without anyone saying it directly that their value wasn't inherent. It was earned through service. And that belief is still running. Every time you give past your limit, every time you say yes when you should say no, every time you sacrifice your own needs for someone who would never sacrifice theirs for you, you're not generous, you're terrified. Terrified that if you stop giving even briefly, even reasonably, you'll discover that there was nothing else there. That your value really did live in what you provided. That without it, you would not be loved. The cost is a lifetime of overgiving and quiet depletion. But here is the truth that childhood never taught you. You are not valuable because of what you provide. You are valuable because you exist. Your worth was never earned. It was never conditional. It was never something you had to prove through service. It was always, always inherent. That picture your childhood drew of you was incomplete. This is the part it never included. Look at all 5 traits together, and one truth becomes unmistakable. Every trait on this list points to the same underlying pattern. A person who learned, in childhood, that their value was conditional, that love required accommodation, that boundaries threatened connection. That saying no meant risking the one thing they needed most being kept. The guilt was never irrational. It was intelligent. It was the exact right response to an environment that made saying no genuinely costly. You weren't broken. You were trained. And what was trained can be untrained. These 5 traits are not evidence of weakness. They are evidence of a nervous system that learned to survive in an environment where boundaries weren't safe, where saying no had consequences, where being loved required not being inconvenient. Every trait was intelligent. Every trait protected you. But the environment that required them no longer exists. The guilt remains. And understanding where it came from clearly, without shame, with something closer to compassion, is the first step towards something different. Your guilt isn't a flaw. It's a survival skill that outgrew its purpose. And survival skills, once you can see them clearly, can finally, gently, begin to change. So, what does change actually look like? 4 small, realistic steps. Practice slowly. Step 1. Notice the guilt without obeying it. The guilt will arrive when you set a boundary. Let it arrive. Just notice it. Don't change your answer because of it. The guilt is old. Your decision is new. They're allowed to disagree. Step 2. Start with small no's. Don't start with the hardest boundary in your life. Start with something small. Low stakes. A request you don't want to fulfill. Practice saying no there. Build evidence that saying no is survivable. Step 3. Separate the no from the relationship. Saying no to a request is not saying no to the person. Those are different things. Most people in your life can hold that distinction. The ones who can't, that's important information about who they are, not about who you are. Step 4, allow the discomfort without interpreting it. The discomfort that follows saying no is not evidence that you did something wrong. It is old conditioning. It is not truth. It will arrive and it will pass. You don't have to wait for the guilt to disappear before you set the boundary. Set the boundary and let the guilt catch up. The guilt you carry after saying no was never evidence that you were being selfish. It was evidence that you cared deeply, more deeply than most people ever learn to care about the people around you. That caring is real. That caring is rare. But it was never supposed to come at the complete expense of your own needs. You are allowed to care about people and still have limits. You are allowed to love people and still say no. Those were never opposites. They were always supposed to exist together. You can finally let them. Before you go, which of these 5 traits felt most personally recognizable? Drop the number in the comments, 1 through 5. I read every single one. And if this video gave language to something you've been carrying quietly for years, you're exactly who UNFELT was built for. Subscribe. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a video. This channel exists for people who are finally ready to understand why they became who they are. You're exactly who this was made for.